All right, perfect. I think we've got everyone. Salamat, everyone. My name is Ahmed. I'm Palestinian from Gaza, and I'd like to welcome you all today to this important conversation with our guest, Reverend Dr. Mitri Raheb. Today's session is titled Decolonizing Palestine, Faith versus Empire, the Weaponization of the Bible to serve the Zionist settler colonialism in Palestine. This national webinar is hosted by Palestine Justice Movement Sydney. We've talked about this topic in length with Reverend Dr. Stephen Sizer a few months back, and we're lucky today to continue this conversation because it's so important from a Palestinian perspective, with our guests all the way from Bethlehem, the occupied Palestine. Before I introduce our valuable guest speaker today, I must start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands from which we're all dialing in today and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. This land was never ceded, always was, and always will be Aboriginal land. We acknowledge that we're dialing in today from ground zero of a genocide that occurred more than 230 years ago, but its echoes still reverberate to our day. I am dialing in from Camragal country. Again, I want to welcome everyone who's joining us today, and I must extend that welcome to those who are joining us from the dark side. In particular, for those guests, I should say that all opinions expressed by myself today represent my own personal views as a Palestinian from Gaza who happened to live on this colony and who happened to have his family enduring the past 25 months of the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And anything I say should not be construed or misconstrued as me using any authority bestowed upon me as part of my workplace. Now, as I mentioned before, we're extremely lucky to be in the company of one of the pioneers in the field of theology as it pertains to geopolitical struggle for justice and liberation in Palestine, Dr. Mitri Raheb. Dr. Mitri is a Palestinian theologian and author of many books, including Decolonizing Palestine, The Land, the People, the Bible. Dr. Mitri is the founder and president of Al-Kalima University in Bethlehem, Palestine, former pastor of Christmas Lutheran Church. Dr. Mitri, I am incredibly grateful for you joining me today. Thank you so much for joining me all the way from the Holy Land, Bethlehem.
Thank you, Ahmed. Good to be with you.
Pleasure is all mine. Dr. Mitri, by the way, I found your book incredibly fascinating and intriguing because it talks to many decades of, if not centuries, really, of religious indoctrination regarding the religious status of the state of Israel, especially in the West. I'm saying centuries of indoctrination, although the state of Israel is probably 77 years old, but the concept of Israel, of an Israel, one can argue, has been embedded within the Western psyche for longer than that. I mean, hopefully we can unpack a lot of that. But the thing is, and you mentioned that at the beginning of your book, that it isn't enough, there hasn't been enough scholarly discourse, in this space, despite, or research for that matter, despite its incredible importance and relevance, especially at this moment in time. We have the most right-wing religious messianic Israeli government in the history of the state of Israel ever since its inception in the Nakba 1948. We have, the most religiously driven American administration. And we all, have come to the conclusion and the realization that the Israeli regime could never survive without the support of its, metropole, so to speak, in Washington, D.C. So, over the past decades and following the establishment of the State of Israel on top of the ruins of ethnically cleansed Palestinian villages and cities, Palestinian scholars have shone the light on the nature of this nascent state as a textbook example of a settler colony, but the religious element of such a structure, however, was not as widely explored, especially through the lens of the Bible and Christianity. You delve into that in your book. In fact, the contribution of the Palestinian Christian population in historic Palestine has not adequately been featured in, the overall narrative of the Palestinian struggle against the Zionist and Israeli settler colonial structure. Before we delve into all these topics that I just mentioned, I really want to, as I usually do when I speak to a Palestinian interviewee, I just want to check in with you. Like, how have you been? I mean, we're in November, Christmas is in a few weeks' time. Being a Palestinian Christian from Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus Christ. How do you reflect on the past couple of years in Palestine and in Gaza? I mean, going into this festive season.
Yeah, thank you, Ahmed. I mean, if you live in Bethlehem right now or in Palestine, I mean, it doesn't feel that Christmas is around the corner because we are busy with other things. The genocide that is taking place in Gaza as ethnic cleansing and in the West Bank as settler colonialism. In fact, our university, which is the first and only university in Palestine with a focus on arts, culture, and design, had a campus in Gaza that was bombed by Israel during Holy Week of last year. So we lost, the whole campus was destroyed, and all of our staff and volunteers have been displaced in 7 counties now in Gaza, all the way from the north to Rafah in the south. We have 36 of them. And so, it's, and here we are dealing, it's like Bethlehem itself is like becoming like a small prison. Gaza, we used to say Gaza is the largest prison on earth. Now Bethlehem, the little town of Bethlehem, is now like a little prison, because 86% of the land of Bethlehem is not under our control. And Bethlehem is in the West Bank. It's not even inside the Green Line. So imagine 86%. Our city is surrounded by 22 Jewish colonies. So they have taken the land, they have taken the resources, and they put us behind high walls, walls that are over 8 meters high. And Bethlehem has now 56 security gates that Israel can operate with a remote control, so they can close the city, nobody can leave. Or so this is the incarceration of the Palestinians in Gaza, but also in the West Bank in different way, is something that that we live through every day. On the other hand, our people continue to show resilience, steadfastness, because we belong to the land.
Absolutely. And, the devastation that's been happening in Gaza as well over the past 2 years. I mean, we hear that a large number of, Palestinian Christians have left Gaza, and, many have been murdered during the genocide. A lot of, churches and buildings, historical buildings, have been completely destroyed. I'm really keen to get your perspective, theologian and historical perspective, about, how important is Palestine and Gaza in Christianity and how important Christianity as well, in Palestine and in Gaza, historically and socially, because people when they think of Palestine, they don't think of the Christian contribution of the Palestinian struggle. Like, could you speak
Right.
to that history?
Yeah. First of all, let's remind ourselves that Christianity did not start in Rome or Athens or Geneva uh, or New York. It started in Palestine. So Jesus was born in Bethlehem, Palestine, not Bethlehem, Australia. And this is where Jesus lived, proclaimed his message. This is where the crucifixion, the resurrection took place. And this is where the first church was born around the year 33 AD. So this is where it's all started. And so this is the oldest Christian community in the world with an uninterrupted history. And if we talk about Gaza, Gaza is mentioned in the Bible several times. In the New Testament, it's mentioned one time. When the Ethiopian eunuch was baptized on the way to Gaza. Since in Gaza, the first Christian monastery in Palestine was created by Saint Hilarion, who lived in the late 3rd century, beginning of the 4th century. So Palestinian monastery didn't start actually in the area around Bethlehem, like many people think, but it started by Saint Hilarion in Gaza. One of the first churches in Palestine was built in Gaza in the 4th century and continued actually until today. In the 6th century, one of the most important philosophy schools in the whole region, in the world actually, was established by Christians in Gaza. And that continued for over 100 years. Nobody think about this history. In Gaza, there were actually bishops from Gaza at the first Christian councils that took place in the 4th and 5th and 6th century. In the Middle Ages, it continued with an Arabic bishop who wrote over 3,000 poems, religious poems on the importance of Jerusalem and the Holy Land for the Christians in Gaza. And the Christian community in Gaza has been a very thriving Christian community because Gaza was actually one of the most cosmopolitan cities in Palestine. It is located on the Mediterranean. It had a port. It's very close to Egypt, yet it is on the main so-called Via Maris, on the road that runs from Egypt to Syria along the Mediterranean coast. And so it was a very cosmopolitan, a very, very thriving, rich city actually throughout. And this until actually the early 20th century. And the Christian community in Gaza, actually, there were two different groups. One, those who actually were originally from Gaza. They were very affluent people. They were mainly business people. And then refugees from the Nakba, 1948, who fled their villages that they were destroyed and came from the Jaffa, Ascalon area, or from the Negev area. They came to Gaza. And so today, unfortunately, less than 600 Christians remains in Gaza. In the last 2 years, 5% of the Christian community in Gaza were murdered by Israeli airstrikes. That's almost the same average like the Palestinian population in Gaza in general. Almost all educational, cultural centers in Gaza, the Christian ones, there were 8, were also destroyed by Israel. And those Christians in Gaza who had foreign passports, they were able to get out of Gaza in the first 6 months of the genocide. And many of them actually went to Australia because they had members of their family living there. So that is just Gaza, because today when people think of Gaza, they think of a poor, destroyed city. But Gaza was one of the most affluent Palestinian cities.
Absolutely. I mean, that contribution to the Palestinian Christians as well in the West Bank and in Palestine, I mean, how does it look like, and why it's not being talked about as well in the media?
Yeah, because I think there is a demonization of the Palestinians, and that is, as you know, is part of the settler colonial ideology. You know that from Australia, settler colonials, they come to a foreign land to settle there permanently, and with the intention actually to replace the original, the native people, not to live with them, but to replace them. In order to do that, they have to demonize the indigenous population. So they are called savage, they are called backwards, they are called terrorists, they are called dangerous, etc. And so this is what happened to us. We were demonized by the Zionist movement, but also by the Western world, because Palestine was seen as Arabs, as Arab. And you have this whole connotation with the word Arab, part of Orientalism that Edward Said, another famous Palestinian Christian, wrote about in his book Orientalism. But also then later were seen as Muslims, and you had the whole Islamophobic package coming with that. And then on top of that, we got the title terrorists, because this is how you demonize the people if you want, to replace them. Because replacing them, they become commodity that are replaceable. And so nobody wanted to talk about the Christians of Palestine. And we became like, like a block, because the Palestinian Christian presence actually interrupted this stereotyping of Palestinians. And so often actually our voice was silenced, and Western Christians used to speak on our behalf. After the first Intifada, more and more Palestinian Christians started actually speaking up, writing books, telling their story, advocating for Palestinian rights. And so more and more, people know of us. Now, the contribution of Palestinian Christians is immense in Palestine. Our university did a study 5 years ago that you can find actually on our webpage of the university. we looked at the 296 church-related organizations operating in Palestine. And what we found out that if we take them together, the church-related organization in Palestine, actually they make the third largest employer in Palestine. The largest employer is the government. The second largest is the United Nations Relief and Work Agency, so a UN agency operating in the refugee camp. The third largest are these church-related organizations. They employ around 10,000 people. They inject into the Palestinian society around $500 million a year. They run 1/3 of the health services. They established 54% of the civil society organizations, and they run around 100 schools, 2 universities, and 2 colleges. Though today the Palestinian Christian community make only 1% of the Palestinian people, because usually we are around 10%. Unfortunately, over 90% of the Palestinian Christian community have immigrated in the last 100 years. And now many of them, they live actually in Sydney, in Melbourne, and in other cities across the world.
These are incredible in statistics, and I think we can find all this information and resources on university website. That's Dar Al-Kalima, is it .com?
No, daralkalima.edu.ps.
daralkalima.edu.ps. We'll make sure to
type it in the chat.
Yeah, that'll be good, and hopefully people check it out and see, explore those resources further. It's interesting because, you know, the contribution of the Palestinian Christians in the Palestinian community has been really, really immense. But equally the oppression that they face as well is equally shared with the wider Palestinian community, but that the light has not been shown on that, because somehow the West likes to view this whole thing as, you know, a war on Hamas, or, you know, or even worse, you know, Jews versus Muslims, you know, generally. So I'm keen to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, you know, I mean, that's part of the demonization when Western media talks about it as if it were a war between the democratic state of Israel against Hamas. And if you hear just the word, how it's spoken, Hamas, it also sounds like dangerous, you know. But it's actually, it's an ethnic cleansing that has been happening not just now. This is now maybe the climax of it. But it has been going on for almost 100 years. Settler colonial project with ethnic cleansing attitude, as I said, to replace the people, to push them out of the country, or to put them in reservations. And so for me, it was very important that when you started by acknowledging where you are standing in Australia, because Australia had this history of settler colonialism. South Africa had it, New Zealand had it, North America had it, and so on. Now Palestine is the last European settler colonial project done by using actually European Jews as subcontractor for this settler colonial European project. So it's not about, and it's not a religious war. I think Israel would like not to have any Christians left in this country, because they can continue to market this as a religious war. It's not a religious war. It's a war about land and resources. And as you know, thanks God, there are also many Jewish people who are in the forefront of people defending the rights of Palestinians, because they believe what Israel is doing does not represent the Judaism that they believe in and the values that they believe Judaism represent.
Absolutely, and the contribution of the anti-Zionist Jewish communities around the world have been really, really immense for the pro-Palestine movement. We have Jewish Council of Australia, we have Jews Against Occupation 48 in Australia, and others, of course, if not now, and Jewish voices elsewhere. Absolutely. And you explain that a lot in your book. So I want to go a little bit in your book, and I have so many questions that hopefully we'll fit them in there because there's so much packed in that book. So in Decolonizing Palestine, you describe the Bible was weaponized to facilitate the Zionist settler colonial project in Palestine. I mean, we've read Edward Said talking about the settler colonialism. We've read a lot of scholars, but you look at it from theologian perspective. Can you explain on that? Because I mean, part of what you mentioned as an example at the beginning of your book was, you know, Danny Danon's speech at the UN following the adoption of UN Resolution 2334, where the US, Obama's US, abstained from voting and the resolution passed. So could you talk about this weaponization of the Bible in light of that example?
You know, the weaponization of the Bible was something that colonial Europe did in the last 400 years. It's unfortunately nothing new. So when the European settlers went to North America, they believed God called them to go there and gave them North America. And so the Native Americans were supposed to be replaced and ethnically cleansed. And as you know, maybe between 14 to 40 million Native people were. But if you look at the literature of that era, you will find how the Bible was weaponized against Native people. And so this is part of colonial Europe. It's not about Christianity. It's about when Christianity actually went hand in hand with settler colonialism. And Pope actually in the 16th century sanctioned this settler colonization in the name of God. And Gaza actually and Palestine is opening the eyes of the world to not only to Palestine, but to what's happening worldwide. And we have really to look into that. Today, you know, if you look at the state of Israel, the state of Israel is violating all human rights charter, international law, Geneva Convention, you know, Jewish values, you name it. So Israel is losing in terms of support internationally. I mean, I'm talking about people in the pew, I'm talking about, you know, people on the street, not about politicians. Okay? So Israel understands that, and so their only resort right now is the Hebrew Bible. And this is why Danny Danon, the story I'm telling, when the US abstained on the issue of Jewish colonies, settlements in the West Bank, Danny Danon, the Israeli ambassador to the UN, said basically, we don't care whatever you say, because, and then he had a Bible, he rose the Bible and said, because this land is given us by God. So basically they're bringing God against human rights, which is totally unacceptable, theologically, politically, because You know, if you think you can violate the human rights in the name of God, you are like ISIS, not better. And so we are fighting back this weaponization of the Bible by Zionists, but also, unfortunately, also by Christian Zionists, who, because Christian Zionism, believe it or not, is older than Jewish Zionism. And it was the attempt of Europe to settle and colonize Palestine. But as I said, they wanted to use the European Jews as subcontractor for their project.
We're going to get into the Christian Zionism because you provide some sort of a different lens how you interpret or describe or define Christian Zionism in your book. And you talk about liberal Christian Zionism as well. And I really want to get into that. But I just want to hone in more on that point of weaponization of the Bible. And now we're seeing in Israel the narrative, this messianic religious narrative. I mean, how might you mentioned the story of the book of Joshua? How is that utilized and continue to be utilized right now in Gaza and in Palestine? I mean, at the beginning of the genocide, Netanyahu spoke about it and recited some of the words from these verses openly. Like how
Right.
you know how much of that is applied now? It's not just history.
Right. And this is actually a new phenomena even in Judaism, using Amalek uh, uh, and to say God called the Israelites in the Bible to ethnically cleanse Amalek. And so if he did that and Amalek equals Palestinian, then we can do this today. And Netanyahu himself on October 27th, 23, when he announced that the Israeli troops are entering Gaza now, he quoted 1 Samuel 15:3, where God is saying to Saul, now go and smite Amalek and kill man and woman, old and young, suckling, sheep and goat. So basically a call to ethnically cleanse Amalek. And Amalek now is projected into the Palestinians. And so the Israeli politicians, but also rabbis, many rabbis, not all, but many rabbis, they think what's happening in Gaza is actually something by divine design. And this is very, 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 very dangerous. And we have, we have to give more attention to this weaponization of the Bible, misusing of the Bible for political ends. But now, even if you use the Bible for ethnic cleansing other people, this is beyond anything we have imagined. And so we need to fight back. And we need also to expose this very dangerous Zionist ideology that is creating death words.
Because it's not only using the Bible as a historical record, which is kind of bad enough, it's using it as a guidance into the future, you know.
Correct. And actually to whitewash criminal acts and genocide, whitewashing it.
And like you mentioned in the book as well, this was a common theme for, you know, a genocide in North America and here on this colony as well. There was some sort of religious aspect to that drive to just justify what they did because they needed a reason. to come to peace with it. I do want to go into Christian Zionism now. Like, if you could help us understand what is it that you think the right definition of Christian Zionism, where it is prevalent now in the US, for example. There's not much of that probably in Australia, but it's mostly in the US. And if you could also talk about liberal Christian Zionism in the religious spaces as well.
Right. Yeah, I think what is new in my book is that I shed light on what I call the liberal Christian Zionism, because if you look at most of the writings in the last 20 years on Christian Zionism, they were dealing with evangelical Christians, Christians who read the Bible literally, or people who read the Bible through the Scofield Bible, and so with this Zionist mindset, but also very evangelical, very conservative kind of theology. The problem is all these books actually didn't give enough attention, or no attention at all actually, to the liberal Christian Zionism. Because liberal Christian Zionism, after Auschwitz in Europe, they developed a theology called theology after Auschwitz, meaning that the church had to rethink the way they were thinking about Jews and Judaism, which was important because this kind of anti-Jewish theology actually enabled the Holocaust. And so it was important for the church to rethink its theology. The problem, these people in this post-Holocaust theology, they became a kind of also a Christian lobby for Israel, a political lobby. And they are more dangerous than actually the evangelical, because evangelicals, you think these are crazy people, but the liberals are the sophisticated, they are liberal on everything except when it comes to Palestine. And so I talk about them, and I mention as an example, I have a comparison on the issue of land between two theologians, liberal Protestant theologian. One is Walter Brueggemann, an American liberal Christian Zionist, liberal in everything. He wrote a book called The Land for American audience. Not one single sentence on the Native Americans. How can you be an American, write a book about the land, and you don't mention the native people of the land? So there is this blind spot. And then this very liberal American theologian wrote a book called Chosen, ? And there, if you read it and how he talks about Israel and Judaism, you find exactly the same evangelical and pro-Israel thinking in that book. So I tried to actually find a new definition what Christian Zionism is. It's not people who are just concerned about the end time and they are evangelicals, etc. But we need to understand actually Christian Zionism as a political lobby, political Christian lobby in support of the settler colonization of Palestine. These people who support Israel, politically, ideologically, they believe that the European Jews belong to Palestine, but the Palestinians do not belong to Palestine. And they use that within a meta-narrative. And this meta-narrative changes from country to another, from context to another, from time to another. And they use local consideration, local or global consideration. And so in every country, it looks differently. But there is also, beside this theological, there is also what I call a cultural a kind of Zionism. This is if you are an average Australian citizen and you listen only to the mainline Australian media, you are by default a cultural Christian Zionism, because the media is not neutral. The media keeps telling the Israeli story. The media doesn't tell the Palestinian story. Even now with the genocide, look how much attention was given by the media regarding the hostages. What about the 11,000 Palestinian hostages and prisoners that Israel actually took and jailed just in the last 2 years? They don't count, as if we are children of a lesser God. So by default, people in the West are cultural Zionists, without them having bad intention. This is what the culture creates. And so we are fighting this uphill battle because our narrative is not told, our narrative is not known, our narrative is being demonized. Our story is told by other people. I mean, look, even in Gaza, Western journalists were not allowed, until this moment, they are not allowed to enter Gaza. Over 260 journalists were murdered on purpose by Israel in Gaza. Most of them Al Jazeera journalists. And why? Because Israel doesn't want the narrative story of the Palestinians, the human story of the Palestinians, to be told up until this moment. And so Western media is complicit in that. And there are studies about how complicit BBC or New York Times or CNN, not to talk about Fox News or other, and you know better about Australia. I'm not, very well versed in terms of media in Australia, but it is part of this Western media.
Yeah, it's pretty awful in terms of portraying two different narratives for two different sides, as if, the Palestinians, do not exist or not represented. But it's really interesting that you mentioned this concept of cultural Zionists, based on what the media portrays the Palestinians to be. I mean, but is that one of the reasons why our religious institutions have not been vocal? Like, why do you think many of the Western religious institutions have been silent on the genocide in Gaza? I mean, even probably worse, sided with Israel. Is it just the fear of being labeled anti-Semites, on behalf of these religious leaders, or is it, just because of being indoctrinated in the wrong interpretation of the Bible? I mean, what is it?
I think there are many reasons for that. One, because most of them are cultural Zionists by default to start with. So culturally. Second, in the last, since the 60s, so for the last 50 years, we noticed a Zionization of Christian theology. And this was done on purpose by Jewish groups. If you look at the literature, for example, most of the literature today, the theological literature, somehow, if you want to be a liberal, respected theologian, you have to be very sensitive to Jewish theology. The third is what Mark Ellis, a Jewish liberation theologian, called the ecumenical deal. With that, he meant that there was a deal after the Holocaust, a deal developed between the church and the synagogue in the West. And this deal says this: the pastor in the church, we would like to keep good relations between the synagogue and the church. To keep these good relations, the church has not to address anything related to the Israeli occupation. And as long as the church is doing that, the rabbi in the synagogue will see the pastor in the church as his brother or her sister and will not call them anti-Semite. Once a church starts to be critical of the state of Israel, the rabbi next door will come and say, look, now you are crossing a red line. If you want us to stay friends and brothers and sisters, don't talk about Palestine. And the fourth is people in position, irrespective if they are pastors, if they are politicians, if they are media people, if they want to keep their job, it's safe not to talk about Palestine, because Palestine might cost you your career. And who would like to sacrifice his or her career on the Palestinian altar? Very difficult. I can understand people, because the Israel lobby in the West behave like a mafia. If you don't pay tribute, they will kill you. And they kill you basically by having you lose your job, your reputation. And even if you are Jewish, like Mark Ellis, this can happen to you.
Absolutely. It's the silencing, it's the anti-Semitism alibi that they usually use for decades and decades to smear anybody who speaks against, the policies of the State of Israel or make any criticism. And we have plenty of examples here in academia, in other spaces. Legal warfares have been, waged against Palestine activists, unfortunately so. And that's why many people don't really dare to speak out against genocide.
Right. Maybe just not to be too pessimistic. Today actually is an interesting day, because today there are elections in New York.
Yes.
And the Israel lobby is trying actually, and the American conservative lobby is trying to push Mamdani out. Until this moment, he seems to be in the forefront. So if Mamdani wins today the elections in New York for the mayor, then it means the Israel lobby is losing actually some of its strength. So let's wait and see what will happen this evening.
Absolutely. I mean, Israel has been losing in the public opinion court for sure. I mean, and that's an important asset for Israel, unlike any other countries, really. It always, as Ilan Pappé mentions in his book, it always looks for legitimacy, even though it's 77 years old. I mean, there's no other countries like this. I do want to go to the Q&A. Apologies to keep you that much. I've got so many questions still, but I do want to go because there are some interesting questions there. So the first question, Sam has a question that was on my mind as well before I started the session. It's saying, after reading Ezekiel 34, how can you be in denial of the right of Jewish people to return to the Holy Land?
You know, I mean, that return took place already BC. It's not about today. That was done. That was biblically speaking. But the thing is, the Bible nowhere talks about, and again, if Jews, they have been part of Palestine all the time. We have no problem with Jews. I mean, Jews, Christians, and Muslims were living side by side, and they are Palestinian Jews. The problem is when Western Jews who had nothing to do with Palestine. I mean, you look at them, you see, like Netanyahu, you know, he's not from the region. And so that's one. Second, when the Bible become an instrument of settler colonization, this has nothing to do with the Bible. This is political ideology. And we have to fight this political ideology. Third, nowhere in the Bible it talks about a nation state. This is not what the promise is all about. And you know, the Palestinians today, you know, many maybe had Jewish roots originally, because, you know, many Jews became Christians, many Christians became Muslim throughout the centuries. So, so it's really not about, we cannot project a nation state of the 21st century into the Ezekiel text that is from the 5th century BC.
I couldn't agree more. And I also always argue, like, before the First World War, there was the Ottoman Empire, and the Jewish communities around the region were tremendous. There's the biggest Jewish community was in Iraq, and then there's in Morocco, and then there are other in the world, in the Arab world. I mean, that sentiment of returning to the Holy Land was not present in there. It was only when this political ideology came and hijacked the entire religion, predominantly, like you mentioned, from Europe, which leads me to the next question, which is saying, why do you call Israel a European colonial project when vast majority of Israeli Jews and Mizrahi Jews who have always lived in the Middle East, particularly Arab countries, like, why, if you could address that question?
No, because those in power, those in the military, in command, most of them are actually Ashkenazi Jews. So even within Israel, there is a pyramid. You have the Ashkenazi Jews in the top. They run the economy, they run the military, the high end of the military. You know, they used to run politics. Then you have the other like Mizrahi Jews. Then you have the Ethiopian Jews, etc., etc. So within Israel there is this pyramid, but the project is a settler colonial project of the British Empire, sending mainly European Jews, not because they love them, but because they wanted to get rid of them in the 19th century, early 20th century. So the settler colonial project and sending Jews to Palestine was not meant to support Jews, but actually to get rid of them, because Europe couldn't actually see that Jews are part of Europe. So they sent them to Palestine and said, we are sending you there not because we hate you, but because God wants you to be there. Again, it's a weaponization of theology for non-kosher methods. So this is what made Israel what Israel is. The Mizrahi Jews and so on, they came after 1948 in the 50s, actually. So it's a totally different story. And then they were indoctrinated in the Israeli army to become like European Jews and Zionists. But they were part of the Arab world, and that was not a problem. So Iraqi Jews that Ahmad mentioned, I mean, they eat like Iraqi. They listen to Iraqi song. They felt they are Iraqi. They were very affluent in Iraq, very instrumental, part of the society for centuries. And this was not really an issue. The issue became when the State of Israel was created, and then they wanted actually to create a security state for imperial reasons in the region. This is the problem.
Couldn't agree more. And for the Iraqi Jewish community, as well, as Avi Shlaim mentions in his book, Three Worlds, he actually says that the community was reluctant to actually migrate to Israel and were facing difficulties and trouble and oppression there because of the color of their skin, as opposed to the Ashkenazis. And the Zionists had to actually implant bombs in synagogues to actually force them out. So it's an incredible book. I mean, I really encourage everyone to read it. It's a good insight. But I do want to go back to one of the questions as well about the US support of Israel. So the question says, and I want to add to it a little bit, do you think the US will have to stop supporting Israel because their reputation is also being tarnished? But I want to put on top of that as well another question, like the current support that we see from the US for Israel, is it driven by religion? Is it driven by imperial investments in the region? Because, I mean, one can argue it's becoming more and more expensive for the US to actually continue to sustain that. Some describe Israel as an aircraft carrier for the US at some point. Is that still the case?
Actually, Israel is, as I said, it was created to be subcontractor for the British Empire. And then the US took over and they became subcontractor for the American Empire. Maybe you heard the German chancellor saying that Israel is doing the dirty job that Europe doesn't want to do. He said that just a month ago. So this is how Israel is viewed, as subcontractors. So there are imperial intentions, but religion plays a role, and the Trump administration is the most Christian Zionist administration ever. So if you look at many of those in this administration, they are evangelical Christian Zionists. So when you see, for example, the Israeli ambassador to Israel, a former Baptist pastor, Huckabee, he says, you know, there is no West Bank, there is no Palestine, this is Judea and Samaria, because this is what the Bible calls it. So, you know, even many Israeli wouldn't agree with him. But if you come with this biblical package and you want actually to project today's Palestine into the Bible, very dangerous, especially if you think that the Israelites of the Bible equals the Israeli of today. What I'm saying actually is the Palestinian of today, they live in a similar situation like the Israelites of the Bible, because they are being occupied by the empire. And so we need to read the Bible upside down to understand really what's going on in Palestine today. But then the third element is the military aspect. because remember, one of the biggest lobbies in the world, if it's not the biggest lobby, is the military and arm trade lobby. We are talking here about trillions of dollars every year in terms of, and this military industry is Israel's largest industry. And so Israel is supported also by the military in every country, including in Australia. And Israel is the only country in the world that can test all the new weapons on real situation, meaning on real people. And this is why every 2 years Israel has been waging war against Gaza, because they were testing, all the new inventions and innovations in the military industry. They were testing it on real people, on real situation. Now, in these last 2 years, testing AI, surveillance, face recognition, motion recognition on the Palestinian people, and then they sell these weapons as tested in real situation, meaning on Palestinians.
Absolutely. And the reputable Australian author Anthony Lowenstein written a book called The Palestine Laboratory, and he explains in it how the defense industry in Israel is actually thriving through the genocide because of the concept that they're testing surveillance and weaponry on Palestinians and then selling them elsewhere to India, to Mexico, to Arab countries as well. So it's fascinating to hear. And that book was featured largely in recent Francesca Albanese's report, linking, all the weapons manufacturing into the genocide. But I do want to go to something that you mentioned, Dr. Mitri, about Auschwitz and, in the context of Christian Zionism and liberal Christian Zionism. I heard you once saying that theology after Gaza won't be the same as theology before Gaza, just like Christianity after Auschwitz was not the same as Christianity before Auschwitz. What did you mean by that?
Actually, that was the latest book I co-edited called Theology After Gaza, that came out a month ago, where I talk extensively about that. Gaza is not only a political issue, Gaza is a theological issue. In the sense, actually, Gaza is like a magnifying glass. It helped us see things in the world that were always there, but we never believed that they are there. For example, white supremacy. We knew and they were writing about it, but we never experienced it so clearly like in Gaza. If you see how the academia worldwide in the West were silenced, and all these academicians who have been coming to us in Palestine, to the global South, preaching about freedom of thoughts and freedom of research and freedom of this and freedom of that. Now, if you speak up at Harvard, you lose your job. If you speak up at Yale, you lose your job. You speak out at Princeton, same story. And these were like, we were always looking up to all of these great universities. And the West was, telling us, you know, we are great because of this freedom of Gaza showed there is no freedom of. Freedom of was meant just for certain people at certain times. If you think how the Bible, what we were telling about the Bible, weaponizing the Bible, was never as clear as now. You know, quoting a verse from the Bible actually to defend genocide was not done in the last 400 years. Now we understand what the native people in Australia 200 years went through. So Gaza actually becomes a theological issue. And the demonization of Arabs, the demonization of Muslims, creating the so-called death world that is happening in so many countries, but now we see it clearly. We understand the mechanism behind it, and we understand how theology is being, you know, weaponized for political ends like never before. And this is theology after Gaza cannot be like theology before Gaza, and the church has to do lots of soul searching actually and repentance for and it will come, because nobody can now say like with the Germans, we never knew, we didn't know. No, now everyone actually, this is being broadcasted 24/7. Nobody can say we did not know.
Absolutely. Certainly, I mean, Gaza has changed the perception of the world for many people, especially in those in the religious sphere. There's a question here from Barbara. It's saying, Dr. Mitri, do you have a vision or solution to the genocide in Gaza and the establishment of Palestine as a free state? But also, I want to add my contribution to that question, because it's a very common question. Two state, one state. What are your thoughts?
You know, the thing is, I don't see on the short run 2 states or 1 state being possible. And so if we fight about 1 state and 2 states, we are losing just lots of the power that we need somewhere else. What is very important, first of all, is to stop the genocide, because it continues. Israel is still bombing Gaza on a daily basis. There is no ceasefire from the Israeli side in that sense. We have to stop the settler colonization of the West Bank. We have to stop the Judaization of Jerusalem. So that's the first. Second, we need to dismantle the settler colonial project. As I said, our vision should be for 2 peoples to live within 3 religions with justice, peace, and as neighbors. For me, if it's 1 state or 2 states, I can live with both as long as there is equality. I cannot live in a system of apartheid. I cannot live in a system where one group has all the rights and the other has no rights, or one group have more rights and the other less rights, because I cannot compromise on the issue of equality. Equality for me is a theological issue. It's a human rights issue that I cannot compromise on. So for me, that is the issue. And maybe if you ask me about my favorite actually is a Swiss model, not the Swiss cheese where Israel gets the cheese and the Palestinians are pushed in the holes like we see right now, but you know, like one federal state with different cantons, where each canton can develop their own ethnic, religious, and cultural identity, but within a larger framework based on equal citizenship. because at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. So it is a kind of a combination between one and two states, but it proved itself in Switzerland, and we can develop something unique for this region. But that actually it is important for Israeli to understand that they cannot be with settler colonial mentality living here trying to replace us. Actually, one scholar of settler colonialism said something very interesting lately in an article, that the genocide actually took place because the settler colonial project of Israel did not work. Israel, after almost 100 years, they were not able to replace the Palestinians. After 100 years, Israel had to discover between the river and the sea, there are 6.5 million Palestinians and 6.5 million Jews.
And so they resorted to the kind of last resort of
Exactly.
a full-blown
Because the settler colonial project did not work the way maybe it worked to some extent in North America or in other places in the world.
I mean, you spoke about that solution and your vision of solution for both peoples. You mentioned equality and justice. Do you see Zionism featuring in that future? I mean, Zionism at some point in time used to be this benevolent yearning to the Holy Land and so on and so forth. Do you see Zionism returning to that version of it?
I think Zionism, political Zionism, is in a big crisis because the settler colonial project didn't work out. And because actually even many Jewish people today, I mean, you know, young secular Jewish people, they don't want every few months to be called to go as reservist into Gaza. This is not the way they would love to live. So, and I think the state of Israel as is has become a liability for the West. It makes, Western politicians, it makes problem for them because now they have to listen to all the cry of their, people. Why are you supporting this? Why are you supporting that? And the pro-Palestinian voices, the pro-justice voices, because they are not pro-Palestinians necessarily, but the pro-justice voices, have become more and more powerful. So Israel, the Zionist project, has become a liability. Now, and many Jewish scholars are saying that it's not only me. But this is something that Jews themselves has to struggle with. And thanks God, I know I have many Jewish friends, scholars, who really are trying to rescue Judaism from Zionism. And this is very important, exactly like many Muslims are trying to rescue Islam from ISIS, or me as Christian trying to rescue Christianity from Christian Zionism, which means this is a call for people of faith. We need to reclaim our religious values and not to allow these religious values to be hijacked by political agendas. That's very important.
Absolutely. That's a really important thing. And I always say, the Jews need to be rescued from Zionism, really, and brought back to the folds of humanity, because what we're seeing in Gaza, it's an utter inhumanity. Those brains have been Zionized.
And you know, the thing is, say in Judaism, but it's like the same in the Quran and so on. You have texts of liberation and you have texts of colonization, unfortunately. So you have the prophets that center justice, and this is not in the New Testament. This is, I'm talking about the Hebrew Bible. And you have the book of Joshua. So what you choose, you know, says not so much about the Bible, it says about you. And this is why, many Jewish people feel uncomfortable with the Zionization of their religion, because they see that as actually Judaism is trying to recreate Judaism in the image of Western Christian colonialism.
You mean Zionism is trying to do that?
Exactly. And this is not Judaism, and this is not Christianity. This is Western colonialism, and we need to name it by name. And once Judaism will be able to get rid of this Western colonial package, it's better for Judaism, it's better for Christianity, it's better for Islam.
Absolutely. Dr. Mitri, I know your time is limited, so in the last few minutes, I'm conscious of time. If you could give us some pointers, like how do we preach this new paradigm of thinking about Palestine, decolonizing Palestine from theological perspective and other perspective as well, not looking at the whole situation as a conflict, but a settler colonialism that needs to be decolonized. How do we preach that? And also, like the Christian churches in Australia, what can they do? How do we push them to act more for in support of equality and liberation in Palestine?
Yeah. First of all, I think what is very important is to listen to Palestinian voices. That's the first thing people can do. Read Palestinian books if you are interested in theological books. Read theological books if you are interested in political, but read Palestinian. Listen to Palestinian voices, genuine Palestinian voices. Second, we invite churches to come and see, because if they come and see with their own eyes, this is much better than reading 100 books. So we need more and more groups to come here. Third, we need people to challenge their governments to stop sending weapons to Israel, enabling the genocide and the settler colonization of Palestinian land. And not because they are in favor of Palestinians, but because also they want, as Australian or whatever, to know that their government is not doing harm worldwide, but is promoting justice and peace as the values and for people in Australia, look up a Palestinian in your neighborhood and talk to him, listen to him, speak to him, ask him questions, so that you have a face and a voice to relate to. You don't think of Palestinians as one big threat, Hamas or whatever, but these are people with flesh and blood. They are people like every one of us. They are not angels, but they are not demons. They are humans like you, like me, like everyone.
Absolutely. And to your point as well, Dr. Mitri, I encourage everyone to buy Decolonizing Palestine. It's a fascinating read. We usually have stalls at markets, and I always buy the book and sell it for education. Grab your copy. Dr. Mitri Raheb, I could not thank you enough for this fascinating conversation. Thank you. Hopefully we'll
Thank you,
have you
Ahmed.
again.
Good to be with you, and thank you for the audience who took time to listen to Palestinian voice from Bethlehem today.
It's absolutely our pleasure. And thank you for everyone who joined us today. Stay tuned for our next webinar and have a lovely day and night. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.